Eat the scraps and stay quiet.
If nobody will feed me, I will find a way.
Everybody knew that 12-year-old Grace was the first to wake and the last to rest. Before the sun rose above the raffia roofs, she would already be outside with a clay pot balanced on her head, walking to the stream in the grey morning light. By the time other children were rubbing sleep from their eyes, Grace had fetched water, swept the compound, washed the cooking pots, and lit the fire for breakfast. Yet the food she helped prepare was never for her. Her stepmother, Martha, had a sharp voice and a harder heart. She liked to sit on a low wooden stool, folding her wrapper across her knees, watching Grace work as if the girl had been born only to serve. Martha's own daughter, Bella, was a year older than Grace, but she did almost nothing. While Grace scrubbed the floor with sand and water, Bella plaited her hair in the shade and complained whenever smoke touched her face. "Move faster," Martha would say whenever Grace paused to catch her breath. "Goats are better fed than lazy girls." Grace would bow her head and continue. She had learned that answering back only made things worse. Her father, Samuel, was a quiet farmer who left home before sunrise and returned after dark. He was not a cruel man, but he was a tired one. Since marrying Martha after Grace's mother died, he seemed to speak less and notice little. When he came home in the evenings, he trusted whatever Martha told him. If she said Grace had eaten, he believed her. If she said Grace was stubborn, he nodded. If Grace's eyes looked hollow and her wrist looked thin, he blamed the season of hard work. One afternoon, after hours under the burning sun, Grace returned from the farm with mud on her legs and hunger twisting inside her like rope. The smell of pepper soup drifted from the kitchen hot. Her mouth watered at once. She had cut firewood that morning, pounded cassava before noon, and carried bundles of dry grass from the edge of the field. All day she had promised herself that, by evening, she would eat something warm. But when the meal was served, Martha filled Bella's bowl first. She added fish, then another piece of fish, and a mound of soft fufu. She served herself next, taking the thickest part of the soup and the tender meat. Then she turned to Grace with a cracked plate and dropped onto it one dry piece of cassava no bigger than a child's palm. Grace stared at it. For a moment, even Bella looked up. "Mama," Grace said quietly, "is this all?" Martha leaned back and laughed. "Why? Do you think you are a chief's daughter?" Grace lowered her eyes. "No, Ma." "Then eat what matches your place," Martha said. "A girl who brings nothing to this house should not ask for more." Bella smacked and dipped her fingers into the steaming soup. Grace took the cassava and stepped outside. The evening breeze was cool, but her face burned. That night, Grace did not sleep easily. Hunger kept turning inside her, but it was no longer the kind that made her feel helpless. It was the kind that sharpened her thoughts. She lay on her mat, listening to the crickets outside and the soft snores coming from Martha's room. By the time the moon had shifted above the thatched roof, Grace had decided what she would do. At first light, she followed Martha to the market with a basket on her head. While Bella stopped to admire beads and bright wrappers, Grace kept her eyes on the ground. Near the women selling vegetables, she noticed yam peels, pepper seeds, and pumpkin stems tossed aside in a corner. At another stall, she saw wilted greens and a handful of beans fallen into the dust. Nobody cared for such things. To everyone else, they were rubbish. To Grace, they looked like a chance. Each time Martha turned away, Grace picked what she could and slipped it into the bottom of her basket beneath the firewood she had been sent to buy. She moved carefully, her heart beating fast, not because she was stealing, but because she was protecting a secret before it was born. When they returned home, Martha ordered her to pound grain, wash plates, and scrub Bella's sandals. Grace obeyed without complaint. But when darkness settled and the compound became quiet, she took the hidden seeds and stems and crept behind the old fence where weeds had nearly swallowed a patch of earth. The soil there was dry and stubborn. The place smelled of damp leaves and forgotten things. Grace knelt and began to clear it with her bare hands. She pulled up weeds, loosened the ground with a broken hoe head, and shaped small ridges in the moonlight. Sweat ran down her neck. Thorns pricked her fingers. Once, she heard a goat rustle nearby and froze, afraid someone had seen her. But no voice called out. No door opened. So she kept walking. When the patch was ready, she pressed the seeds into the soil as gently as if she were laying down hope itself. The yam pieces went into one corner. The pumpkin stems into another. The pepper seeds she scattered in a neat row. Then she covered everything carefully and carried a calabash of water from the stream to wet the thirsty earth. For days, Grace guarded her secret. Every morning before the rooster's second cry, she watered the patch. Every night after the cooking pots were washed, she checked the ground again. She did not beg for extra food anymore. She no longer stared at Martha's pot with pleading eyes. She ate what little she was given and saved her strength. Martha noticed the change and frowned. "This girl is too quiet," she muttered one afternoon. Bella shrugged. Maybe hunger has finally taught her sense. But Grace said nothing. Deep inside, where their words could not reach, a stubborn little hope had already taken root. Within 3 weeks, the hidden patch behind the old fence began to answer Grace's patience. First came tiny green shoots, so small they could be mistaken for weeds. Then broader leaves spread across the loosened soil, and thin stems pushed upward as if they too were determined to live. Each morning Grace knelt beside them with a smile she never showed inside the house. She watered them before sunrise, loosened the soil around them with a stick, and plucked away the weeds that tried to choke them. Soon, the patch became a small garden. There were pumpkin leaves curling along the ground, pepper plants standing straight, and yam vines creeping steadily upward. Grace could hardly believe it. The very things others had thrown away had become food. When the first pepper ripened red, she held it in her hand for a long moment, almost afraid to pluck it. Then she laughed softly to herself, roasted a small yam, and ate with pepper and leaves near the stream. It was not a feast, but it was enough. For the first time in many months, Grace ate until the ache in her stomach eased. As the days passed, her cheeks looked less hollow. Her steps grew firmer. She still walked from dawn to night, but she no longer staggered from weakness. One afternoon, as she returned from the stream, she saw 2 little boys sitting under a mango tree, watching other children eat roasted maize. Their faces were thin, and their eyes followed every bite. Grace slowed. Then she went to her hidden garden, pulled 2 small cobs of maize, roasted them, and carried them back. The boys stared. "For us?" one asked. Grace nodded. "Share it well." They ate like children who had forgotten what it felt like not to be hungry. After that, Grace began to share whenever she could. A roasted yam for an old widow. A handful of greens for a nursing mother. 2 peppers for a sick man's soup. She gave quietly and asked for nothing. But kindness does not stay hidden for long. Soon, people in the village began speaking of the thin girl who always seemed to have something to give. The old widow blessed her openly. The nursing mother praised her at the well. And from the doorway one evening, Martha watched Grace return with empty hands and a face that looked strangely full of peace. For the first time, suspicion entered Martha's heart. Suspicion grew in Martha like a thorn on the skin. For 2 days she said nothing, but her eyes followed Grace everywhere, the stream, the cooking hut, the path to the farm, even the old fence behind the compound. Grace felt the weight of that gaze and became more careful. She entered her hidden garden only at dawn and after dark. Yet one evening, as she bent to cut pumpkin leaves, she heard dry grass crack behind her. She turned. Martha stood there. For a moment neither of them spoke. The fading light fell across the rows of pepper, maize, and yam vines, across the loosened earth and the neat little ridges Grace had made with her own hands. Martha's mouth parted in disbelief. Then disbelief hardened into greed. "So this is why you no longer look half dead," she said. Grace gripped her basket. "I planted it myself." Martha stepped closer, eyes moving over the garden like a trader sizing up goods. "And you hid it from this house?" Grace swallowed. "I hid it because you would have taken it." Martha's face darkened, but she did not strike her. Instead, she smiled, and that smile frightened Grace more than anger. That night Martha said very little at supper. Bella complained about the small piece of fish in her bowl, but Martha only nodded absent-mindedly. Long after the cooking fire died, she woke Bella and whispered her plan. Before dawn, the two of them slipped behind the fence with sacks and a lantern. They tore up maize, yanked pumpkin leaves, pulled peppers by the handful, and dug carelessly at the yam mounds. "Faster," Martha hissed. "We will sell everything in the morning market. Let people think Bella grew it." In their greed, they destroyed more than they gathered. Stems snapped. Roots were ripped out too early. Half-grown vegetables were crushed beneath their feet. By sunrise, the garden looked wounded. Grace found it moments later. She stood in the ruined patch with trembling hands, her throat tight with grief. But she did not cry for long. In the soft mud she saw Martha's footprints, Bella's broken sandal mark, and a trail of dropped peppers leading toward the road. Grace lifted her head. If they wanted to steal her labor, let the village see whose hands had truly worked the soil. She wiped her face, straightened her shoulders, and followed the trail toward the market. By the time Grace reached the market square, a crowd had already formed around Martha. One of the sacks had split open in the middle of the road, scattering peppers, maize, pumpkin leaves, and half-covered yams into the dust. Traders shouted as people stepped back to avoid crushing the produce. Martha tried to smile as if nothing was wrong, but Bella's face had turned pale. Then Grace walked forward. "That food is mine," she said, her voice steady. Martha laughed sharply. "Listen to this girl. Since when did a child own a harvest?" Before Grace could answer, old widow Ruth, the woman Grace had once helped with greens, raised her walking stick. "Since the day she planted it with her own hands," she said. "I saw her carrying water before sunrise while others slept." A nursing mother stepped out from the crowd. "She gave me vegetables when my baby was sick. And roasted maize for my sons," another woman added. Soon voices rose from every side. One by one, the villagers spoke of Grace's kindness, labor, and the food she had shared when nobody else noticed their need. Martha's mouth opened, then closed. For the first time, her lies had nowhere to stand. Someone sent for Grace's father. When Samuel arrived and heard everything, shame fell over him like rain. He looked at the spilled harvest, at Martha's torn sack, at his daughter's thin face and dirt-stained hands, and understood more in that moment than he had seen in many months. He turned to Grace. "Is it true?" he asked. Grace nodded. "I worked. I planted. I was hungry, so I found a way to eat. When I had extra, I shared it." Samuel bowed his head. The market grew silent. Then the village headman stepped forward and spoke with authority. Martha was ordered to return every coin from the stolen harvest and to repay Grace with labor on a new plot of land beside the stream. Bella, too, would work there under the eyes of the village women. As for Grace, the woman promised she would never struggle alone again. By the next planting season, Grace's garden had become the finest in Red Earth. She sold vegetables, fed the hungry, and ate at her father's table with dignity. Martha never mocked her again. And so the girl they tried to starve became the one whose hands fed the village.